Yes, hello and welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Stuart.
And I'm Simon.
And we've been finding, buying and growing income for property for over 20 years. And we talk on this podcast every week about the reality of running our property businesses. As always, first of all, thank you to all those listening to the show and leaving us reviews and ratings. If you haven't yet done so, please do that. It really does help the show and we very much do appreciate it. And we always read out the reviews, every single one of them. So please do that. So this week, Simon and I are talking about how to find tenants. And before we get into that conversation around how you would do that, at the highest level, you kind of got three options. And main option, which we all know and love, is essentially you use an agent, and that agent will do everything for you. So they'll find the tenant, they'll onboard the tenant, they'll do all of the tenant checks, etc. So it's truly a hands-off. There is also another agent option, which is Tenant Find only. And for that, you will pay a set fee of a certain amount. And the agent will do exactly what it says on the tin. They will find that tenant, place it into your property, and then essentially hand it over to you. And then you run it from there on in. Third option, and the one we're talking about today, for those of you that are thinking about taking this on yourselves or have done some of it, but not all of it, is really around finding your own tenants. And who better to kick us off with this other than Simon, because Simon is very much doing this on all of his portfolio and is best placed to talk about how we start it. So when you think about this, Simon, what's the first thing you think about when you're thinking about getting a tenant into a property? So, for example, obviously you did this very recently in the last year. You were purchasing an investment property. In the back of your mind, you're always thinking about when the right time is to get that tenant.
Yeah, so I think first of all, oh no, not again, because I don't really enjoy the whole process of finding a tenant, partly because it is sort of effort, but also because it means there's sort of a risk of a void or a gap between tenancies and things like that. And there's lots of moving pieces to try and be aware of as you're changing tenants over. So perhaps I should start off with why I do this myself rather than delegating it out to an agent. And I have in the past used Tenant Find agents. I don't think, if my recollection is correct, ever used a full managing agent, but I have used Tenant Find agents in the past. But I don't do that anymore, partly because it gets very expensive, as in some, I think the sort of standard fee for just a tenant find is in the region of a month's rent these days. Sometimes I have heard of it being even more than that. Back when I used to do it, it used to be half a month's rent. So that seemed a bit sort of more manageable. But yeah, so it's got a bit more expensive. And also, I feel that when the agent is just finding you the tenant, particularly when it's just a tenant find agent deal, is they don't really care all that much about who they find for your property. It's just sort of, oh, it's a tenant. Yeah, that's fine. Off you go. Tick the box. Job done. Get the income. And these days, I very much take a lot more care about who the tenant is, and not just from sort of will they pay the rent, which is obviously a very key element of it, but also will they look after the property, and will they stay in the property for a reasonable amount of time? Because, as I said a few moments ago, I don't look forward to this process, and hence I'd quite like it not to be happening every 6 months. It would be good if it was happening every few years, ideally, but certainly as least often as possible.
Yeah, and I'll just add very quickly on the tenant find for that very reason. And of course, most of my portfolio is HMO. If we did a tenant find for, and I would say it's roughly the same. So essentially, you'd pay typically 1 month's rent for that service. Obviously, if someone only stayed, hopefully you'll have minimum contracts for 6 months, but it could be less. But the quicker, obviously, those people rotate out, obviously, the more you're paying for it, as opposed to the 12-15% that you might pay an agent over the longer term. So that was always my worry, because you've then got someone in, and if you paid for someone that maybe the diligence hasn't been as much as you would like, then they're going to turn over quicker, which means actually you're paying more for that. Tenant Find service.
Exactly, and especially in HMOs, because tenants do just tend to stay for shorter periods in HMOs. And where I'm looking at sort of family homes, I would hope that the family might stay for years and years and years. And indeed, I think my longest tenant is going on for 10 years nearly now. So I think that's fairly common in a family home. But in an HMO, to find an HMO tenant living in the same room for 10 years, I think is exceptionally rare. Even more than a year, I suspect, is fairly uncommon.
So where do people start? Well, if they've not done it before and they are scared to make that jump from agent to tenant finding, it can seem quite daunting. If you want to build a business, and I would just say this before we go into that: if you are looking to build an agent a property business, I say agency business because essentially that's what you become, and that's certainly what my business is kind of become is basically a letting agent, but it can feel a little bit daunting. However, you're going to keep that additional income within the business. But Simon, where did you start?
So I'll just quickly say on that yes, I've sort of become a letting agent, but only for a very short period of time, and hopefully not very often. but yes, if in a bigger portfolio and a bigger property business, yeah, you're right. You're doing this yourself. You are taking on a lot of those roles and those actions. So I think the place to begin is to be prepared. So before you can put your property out there on the market, there are things you need to have ready about your property. And of course, the most obvious one is good photos. And there are some sort of basic tips if you're going to take photos yourself. I wouldn't actually recommend this, but always make sure the rooms are well lit. Turn the lights on, even if there's sunlight coming in, so they're really well lit. Use a good camera. Make sure you capture as much of the room as you can, and make sure that it's not weird angles and things like that. But also tidy rooms, clean, things like that. If you're taking photos when tenants are in the property, because you're now looking for new tenants, or replacement tenants, I should say, then ask them to actually tidy up, because it does make a real difference to the impression that people take from looking at these photos. But if you can, sorry, go on, Stuart.
I was going to say we can, go into this, and we're not going to go into it too deeply, but I would just say that on that score, it's incredibly important. And, sometimes we think it's common sense, and it's not always common sense, but it's also that some people just aren't aware of it. So what, also if it's a property that you've had for a period of time, or as you've said, there are tenants in it, it's very easy just to basically do what you can. My little tip on that is speak with the existing tenants and or agents. So I literally do speak to tenants and say, look, we've got people come around to take photos, or we've got viewings on this day. Please ensure that the beds are made and things are just packed away. And that's a perfectly reasonable request that not everybody does. So I would just follow through on that, because the photos make all the difference. And the final thing I say is, if you're unsure, just show some photos to a friend or someone that you're talking with in a coffee shop, and just say, what do you think of these property photos or this property? And you'll get an objective view, because sometimes it's very hard, because if it's our own property, to see the little things, because we put up with the sofa. It's like at home. You go to other people's home and you go, oh, that sofa looks a bit ropey, or, oh, I don't know why they haven't cleaned that up or painted that patch in the corner, because day in, day out, we see it and it becomes less of an issue. But of course, when you're trying to, and also attract the best tenants, you want to make sure that you've got a good property photos to attract those.
Yep. I'll make sure we redecorate before we invite you around next, Stuart. So, so that's sort of some tips on photos. But really, I would suggest getting a professional photographer to take photos. And ideally, I would, if you can prepare enough, I would do this when the property's empty, either before you've got tenants in it at all, or perhaps when you have a gap between tenants and you get that opportunity. In my experience, taking professional photos cost in the region of £200. Obviously, it's more if the property is bigger, it's more if you're in the south, less if you're in the north, and sort of various fluctuations that people are used to. But it's in that range. And quite often, photographers these days will also put together a floor plan for you. Lots of rental property listings don't have floor plans, but I think they really help. And it'll differentiate your listing from a lot of other rental listings if you do have a floor plan. And lots of photographers will do that now as part of doing the photos. So I think that's all good to have. The other thing you need is a description of your property. It doesn't need to be anything very fancy. You can even ask AI to write descriptions these days for property. And the AI ones come out a bit strange because obviously they're very generic. It doesn't really know what your property is, but it gives you a starting base, and then you can just sort of tweak it from there. So I mean, I'll just read out my one for my recent property very quickly. So it's I'm proud to offer this delightful 2 double-bedroom, 2-bathroom terraced house in a great location. And you can see this is not really my writing. I've taken some inspiration here, but it then goes on to say it's available to move in from the date that it's available from. This property benefits from allocated parking with an EV charger and has been recently refurbished throughout. The kitchen has all appliances, including a dishwasher. The property has an easy maintenance private garden, and the property is offered unfurnished. And that's basically it. That's all you need. You don't need to go crazy in the description. It just needs to show the critical details about the property. And I think that's it. And then you're ready. You do need an EPC to be compliant as you're listing your property, but the listing portals will help enforce that anyway. But yeah, that's it for being prepared.
So the question I think people will ask on that is always furnished or unfurnished, and so you've got yours as unfurnished, and my understanding was always that unfurnished is better, but that does depend on the property type. So obviously, obviously, it's not always obvious, but within our properties that are HMOs, they are all furnished, and because that's the expectation. Obviously, you're marketing a family home, and typically families will want to bring their own stuff because that's what we do. So I just highlighting that as a point for people to think about, because that is just one thing, but also, it's not something I get completely hung up on. If you've got a brand new property that is unfurnished, then that's how I would advertise it. If you've had a property that's been furnished, my first thought would be, well, okay, if that's the way it's been, market it as furnished, because typically people that want you to get rid of stuff will come to you and ask if they can get rid of the bed, or say get rid of it, they'll ask you to take away the bed or the coffee table or whatever it is. So I don't think it's one of those things to get hung up on, but just to be mindful of that those are options, that you can have furnished or unfurnished, but typically for family and buy-to-lets, unfurnished is typically better versus HMOs where people expect the stuff to be in the property.
Yeah, a sort of slight tweak on that is around the kitchen appliances. And even in buy-to-let, you're never quite sure whether you should include kitchen appliances or shouldn't include. And this can range from sort of dishwashers through washing machines through fridge freezers. You, generally speaking, would expect the oven and hob to be provided. But in the property I've been advertising recently, those things are all there. They are sort of part of the kitchen. Not all built in, but obviously they're there. But one of the people viewing recently did say, "Oh, well, we've got our own washing machine. Could we put that somewhere, or could we swap them over?" And you could maybe, but so you do have some sort of, I don't know, massaging of sort of expectations versus what's available to work out, even just within a kitchen.
Yeah. And for me, those conversations, it's always on the owner, as in we are the property owners. And if if I've got a washing machine, I've had this on a couple of items actually recently, where someone wanted to replace the bed that were in there, and I said that's fine, but you'll have to find the storage of the bed, and also arrange for the removal of the bed. And guess what? No bed. They did, and it's the same. If someone's got their own washing machine, I'd say, well, my first answer to that would be no. Washing machine is a washing machine, but I appreciate. So again, I think people ask the questions because they're just the questions to be asked. But if they're so deeply in love with a washing machine, I'd say put it in storage. If that's how in love you are with this, which people can be, But let's get into. So we've talked about the property, and we've talked about some of those elements. So let's get into actually how do we go out and find the tenants? Where are we going to get these people from?
Indeed. So once you've got all your information prepared, you've got to get a listing out there. You've got to advertise your property. And there are a number of different sort of do-it-yourself options and sites for this. I'm going to mention two, but as I said, there are lots of others. There are lots of others out there. So the two I will mention is Open Rent, which is the one I use or have used recently, and they will put a listing out to all the main portals and their own site and things for £49 at the moment. Another one that I think Stuart's used in the past is called Visum, and their current price is £89 for roughly equivalent to what Open Rent does for the 49, and that's again all sort of portal listings and things. They do have a slightly cheaper option than their 89 one, which is a bit more restricted. But I just thought I'd give the like for like pricing there. So once you've chosen your advertising site, obviously you need to sign up, create an account. They will quite often go through a verification process now to ensure that you do actually own the property or have rights over the property that you're trying to rent out. And I think this is to try and combat a lot of fraud that is around these days, unfortunately. But once you've gone through that process, it's normally very straightforward. Upload the photos, upload the floor plan, fill in your description, fill in some extra standard stuff. So as well as information in the description, they are standard questions like, is it furnished or unfurnished? What's the rent? What's the deposit? What's the date it's available from? Do you accept pets or smokers or various other sort of yes or no type requirements? So you fill all those in, fill in the choice of product you're wanting to choose for the advertising, and click the button. And that's it really. Oh, of course, you have to pay them. but they will then put the listing live. It takes anything from a few minutes to a few hours to get the listing actually up onto the various portals. And then you sit back and wait for the inquiries to roll in.
And my experience is that they do roll in the current markets, they do roll in and you get a lot of inquiries. So the other element I would advise people, if you're going to do this yourself, and of course, Simon and myself are both highly engaged with Patma because Simon founded the software, and Patma is designed for people, not just self-managing, but people that want to operate their property businesses. But what is really key for me is the organisation, obviously pre-submission of your advert to the market, because my experience is you will get a lot of inquiries, and not all inquiries are equal. So my experience of Visum, which is a good one, because the property is in a very good location, or ours that we tend to use it for. It's in a very good location, etc., etc. So we get stacks in the first 24 hours. We can get anything up to 50 inquiries. And what Visum has, and I'm sure Open Rent will have something similar, is that immediately you can grade those inquiries before you've done anything. And the first thing I tend to do, and actually this was my little tip, and it's a little tip I use in lots of areas of my life, but I send out an automated email that requests a little piece of information. And to be honest, it doesn't matter what it is, but what it does is it does a couple of things. It lets you know sort of how keen the person is, and it lets you know what sort of person they are in terms of whether or not they feed back with what it is you've asked. So I'll have an automated thing. As soon as someone inquires, it sends them a little message, says, thanks a lot for your inquiry. Please note that this property is X, Y, and Z. So also you can set out some things that, again, might exclude certain people, but it's a studio flat, so it's not suitable for etc. Or it might, unfortunately, whatever it is, put something in there. And again, half the people will respond to that, half the people won't. So those half that just haven't responded, they're gone. Yeah, I always think of David Brent when I do this, because it reminds me a little bit of when you're employing someone and you take a lot of CVs. David Brent, famously of The Office, and he's got some sage advice there. He said one of the things that he always says is never employ unlucky people. So take half the CVs that you receive and throw them in the bin. I thought that's really good. So obviously we're not advising that you just select half people and throw them in the bin. It's just a joke. But there is a good. The software is really good. Then once I've had a bit of communication, so on Visum they've got like a 5-star rating. So 5 stars being really good, 1 star being not so good, and that could just be in your initial engagements or things that just think, oh, that doesn't sound quite right. So that would be my kind of tip on that is, use that software for those for what it's intended for, to help you compress the number of leads you've got.
Yeah. This is somewhere where, or an element where I think Fisum is better and does this processing better. Open Rent's sort of messaging back and forth between tenants and prospective tenants and landlords is a bit clunky. You don't get that rating system, and it's a bit difficult to keep track of who you've replied to and who you haven't, and sort of managing that in Open Rent. So it's not as good, but it is cheaper. So but I thought, having done this quite recently, I would just read out the questions that I actually respond to people. So in that sort of initial message that goes out, as you say, to rule out basically 50% of people who won't bother following up. And I do actually use it to actually sort of collect some information. So I have a little intro that says, thank you for your inquiry. There have been lots of inquiries, so I would like to request some extra details. Can you please reply with answers to these questions? So 1, how many people, adults, children, would be living at the house? 2, what jobs or work are these people currently doing? 3, where are you currently living? 4, what rent are you currently paying? 5, why are you looking to move? And 6, what pets do you have, if any? And in my recent experience, as Stuart said, about half of people just won't bother replying. So that's them dealt with. Don't need to worry any further. Then the other half, in my experience, actually reply pretty completely, and they provide good information that you can actually use to try and gauge whether they would be the right type of tenant for you. And this isn't always just sort of picking the ones with the biggest income or the fancier sounding jobs or whatever. It is also looking at why they're looking to move at the moment. Because I mean, it might be that their current landlord is selling and has asked them to move, and that's sort of a fairly legitimate reason, I think, to move. Other people might have more unusual sounding reasons for moving that you might want to question and ask them a bit more about. So yeah. I think it's a good sort of first categorization of people.
Yeah, and I think also, as I said before, there's a level of diligence required for people to feel that back. Because I'll be honest, if I got that sort of email, I'd be like, oh, I don't know if I could be bothered to do it. However, in the current climate where we know that renting is tricky, I would imagine more people to do it. So the half that couldn't bring themselves to do that, for me, already gives me a level of confidence in those that have responded. And conscious of the time we've got on this podcast, so when we've got a number of requests, and Simon's already talked about that, what I've tended to do is that I will, when I put the property in the market, I've already decided the day I'm going to do an open day. Because then, if we're doing this ourselves, time is of the essence, and my time is quite important. Obviously, everyone's is to themselves. So I will select a day, and it will be date X, and it'll be, and I'll try and make it reasonable. So it'll be on a Saturday, let's say 3 or 4 weeks hence, so that everyone has an opportunity. And unfortunately, you do get a lot of people that say, I can't make this date because of X, Y, and Z. Can I come on another day? And unfortunately, they will also deselect themselves for that reason because again, look, sometimes I don't always feel great because some people work and they'll work in kitchens or restaurants, and it's not tricky, but we've had so many inquiries. We had to do that. We had to do that. So you're totally nodding, agree. Simon. So I'm guessing you do something very similar. So on the next level, how do you plan out that day?
Yep, exactly the same as you suggested, really. Obviously, because I've got tenants currently in the property, I need to arrange it with them. Need to work out whether they want to be there as well, or whether you can show people around without them. In this case, my current tenants prepared the property and cleaned and tidied and whatever else, and then said that they would be out for the viewings and let me handle them. And yes, it's just I had a couple of hours in the morning, a couple of hours in the afternoon on this particular day, and they were the slots that I had available. In the past, I have sort of, well, in fact, the last time I was letting out this property last year, I had much sort of shorter slots. I think I did 15-minute slots. And at that time, I let people just wander around the house on their own because it was empty. Whereas this time, I knew I needed to actually walk around with prospective tenants, because obviously there's current tenants' belongings in the property and things, so you can't just leave people to wander around on their own. So I allocated longer slots. I actually went for half an hour on this time, and I think that was probably a little bit too long. But some of the people who actually came and looked around were telling me that the other places they've been to view with agents, they were not just doing block viewings, as in sort of one after another, but they were having 3 sets of prospective tenants all view simultaneously. So as in they'd wait for the 3 sets of prospective tenants to turn up, and then they'd walk round sort of 6 people at a time around this property to view. And I think that sounds a bit crazy. And particularly one of the reasons why I wouldn't want to do that is because I like the opportunity to actually talk to the prospective tenants a little bit. I actually tend to just ask them the same questions I asked them in the email message earlier, but I feel I get a better response, perhaps more detailed, and you can ask follow-up questions and things like that by asking them in person. So as I'm walking around the property, showing them the property, I'll also ask them these questions. So that I think that works quite well with the actual viewing process. But taking a step back a little bit to arranging these, I used some technology to help me with this on this occasion. So I had these slots, and I used a system called SavvyCal, because I use this with Patma anyway for arranging appointments. But you can actually arrange these or create these appointment slots in Google Calendar these days. And there's also a free product called cal.com, which also allows you to do the same kind of thing. Pick an area or pick a time slot and say there's 30-minute slots in this time period. Then you just send a link out to all of the people that you think are good enough that you'd like to offer a viewing to, and they can self-select the time that they want to turn up. I think that works very well for sort of self-organizing. You don't need to keep going back and forth to different messages saying, can you do this slot? No. Oh, could you do this one instead? And things. You just send out a link saying, here you go, here are the slots available, pick the one you want.
Yeah, definitely. And we set limited slots, so I had maximum of whatever it was, 10 or 15 on the day, and that was going to be the limit, because we'd done this before and we were confident that we would get offers. And for us, the first person that viewed it offered, wanted to be, the second person did, the third, but I think it was a little while ago now. So, but I think by the third or fourth person that said they wanted the property, I then cancelled all other viewings, because it just didn't seem fair to everyone else. And like I'd spent a few minutes with the person walking around the property having a conversation. I was very comfortable with the people that were viewing the property. And again, it was one of the things you don't want to have to do, but we cancelled the remaining viewings just for them. Because already having 4 offers on the table was going to be, challenging enough. But our process was quite simple for that, based on doing all the other checks. Is if they're all the same, it was going to be first come, first served.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I take a different approach to that. So my approach is to sort of tell everyone that has a viewing up front that I don't want them to say straight away whether they want to make an offer or not. I will not sort of look at offers until all of the viewings are done. So I ask people to go away, think about it. If they do want to make an offer on the property, send me a message through Open Rent in my case, but through whatever platform you're using. And then I will sort of consider them all afterwards. And I do actually consider them. I don't go with just first come, first served. I go back to sort of what I think would be best for my property business. So I'm not trying to choose the person I like the most or whatever. I'm trying to choose the one that I think will look after the property, will pay the rent, will stay in the property a reasonable amount of time, and things like this. So there's lots of different things I am trying to weigh up. And in this most recent case, I had over 50 inquiries at the sort of first point. As you say, half of them didn't reply to the email, but then lots did. I offered viewings to somewhere in the region of 15, and in the end, I actually did 8 viewings. People actually turned up and things, and I had 7 offers from that. And from those 7, almost all of them were really good, strong candidates that I would be happy to rent to, and I would think would meet the sort of business requirements. So, in actual fact, on this occasion, it came down to flipping a coin as to who I actually went with in the end. So there you go. We're back to the office and choosing the lucky tenant.
Which, yeah, for me, it comes back to, it's like, for, the reason, because first come, first served is almost the same. If all things are equal, essentially it is luck of the draw, isn't it? Because, however, I would say that the person that got the property the last time round, she was so keen. She said, "Could I come and see the property an hour before we'd intended it?" She said, "I'm in the area," and I've done this before with employing people, and I do find it very similar when you're employing people, because you're doing a number of things at the same time, you're trying to get to know them. And the fact that she had demonstrated that she was really keen, in fact, she travelled from somewhere quite far away. She was desperate to be the first viewer, because I think she had an inkling of how it would be. So that's, and for me, like I say, if all things are equal, then there is, other than pulling short straws, it all comes out the same way if you're comfortable with those people. So look, we're drawing towards the end of this podcast episode, and we've already gone into quite a lot of detail around how we would set about finding tenants using software. Once you get to the stage that we've just talked about, which is finding a tenant, you're then in a prime position to really get on board with a software like Patma, Property and Tenant Manager, where what will happen then is Patma creates a checklist for you from then on, because we've gone into the level of detail that you would need for selecting a tenant, and rightly so, because these are properties that we either own or are looking after on behalf of owners. So we want to make sure we've done that due diligence. But then there is a lot more to be done in terms of administrative duties, legal requirements, right to rents, how to rents, all of the certification. But what's great about softwares like Patma, and we obviously advocate for that, is that all of that work will be done for you in terms of a simple checklist that you will then provide things to. We're not going to get into that today, because there's a lot more that we'd like to go into that. Well, we will come back to that in another podcast episode and talk through those elements and actually run through that checklist that Patma provides to take all of the burden away from you in terms of thinking. But other than that, Simon, any final tips for the listeners and viewers that are thinking about ditching the agents and taking this on themselves?
I think I would just say that you can make great savings, and it can be fantastic to actually create that relationship with the tenants you're going to be bringing in. But do be aware, it does take a little bit of effort.
Yeah.
So there's a slight trade-off there, but I personally think it's well worth it.
Yeah, and that was my final point as well. So we were in sync, which is just by doing this ourselves, we saved thousands of pounds in 1 year, and that was on one property. We saved thousands of pounds. However, that comes at the cost of effort, because it's quid pro quo. So all of the things we've just talked about, you're going to take on that the agents do. But if you're paying 10, 12, or typically 12%, I would say, certainly in the southeast. But I know people that are paying 18% as well, including VAT. So you can save thousands just on one property alone by doing it. So there is definitely value there, but you then have to trade in some of your time or the team's time if you're going to do that. But it's definitely worthwhile. Hope you found some value in this podcast episode. If you have, do please at least leave a rating and or review if you feel so inclined. Other than that, we'll see you in the next episode.